of the day.
Ballot item number 69, private member's notice of motion number 57. Ms. Fife.
The member for Kitchener-Waterloo.
Speaker, I move that in the opinion of this House, the Government of Ontario should, through legislation, enhance the tools available to law enforcement agencies in their search for missing persons while protecting individual rights and freedoms enshrined within the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms.
Ms. Fife has moved private member's notice of motion number 57. Pursuant to Standing Order 98, the member has 12 minutes for a presentation. The member for Kitchener-Waterloo.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And before I begin, I would like to welcome Maureen and Don Trask to the Ontario Legislature. They have been very instrumental in this entire journey, really, and have provided hundreds of petitions calling on the government to act on missing persons legislation. As MPPs, we hold a position of privilege and responsibility to bring the voices of our constituents, their concerns, their stories, and we are called to find solutions. This resolution calls for a legislative solution to the issue of missing persons, where criminal activity is not suspected at the time that the person is reported missing. Any proposed legislation will need to strike the appropriate balance between access to key information and privacy rights, which is why the Charter is named in the motion. We have already been in contact with and conversations with the Canadian Civil Liberties Associations and respective police forces. As in other provinces, we have the opportunity to craft a piece of legislation that would be inclusive of the rights of those who are vulnerable and at risk. This is possible, as other provinces have done so. It is simply a case of political will. For those of you who are wondering when we refer to missing persons, who we're referring to, a missing person is someone whose whereabouts are unknown despite reasonable efforts to search for this person and whose safety and welfare may be at risk. These are parents with dementia. These are children with mental health issues. They are hikers or those seeking adventures. And yes, this is inclusive of missing Aboriginal women and youth. So how did we get here? The struggles of families whose loved ones have gone missing first came to my attention through Maureen Trask and her husband Don, constituents whose son had gone missing north of Temagami. In 2011, Maureen's son Daniel travelled north to Temagami with few supplies and disappeared. Because no foul play was suspected, the police were not able to conduct a full investigation. When there is no evidence of criminal intent, police do not have the authority to investigate. They cannot open banking records or compel information like phone or text records. Many people, Mr. Speaker, do not know this. To quote Maureen, "When my son Daniel went missing in 2011, I couldn't know the barriers I would face in trying to find answers. It shocked me and other local families to learn that police have no ability to access personal information or locations of our missing adults when there is no evidence of a crime. How can this be? How can you assume there is no crime if police can't even get access to information? Missing persons legislation would have helped my family and will help countless families by giving equal investigative opportunity to find answers. We found Daniel this year, but too many other families are still looking, and they deserve answers too. Other provinces have implemented legislation. It is now time for Ontario. It's the right thing to do to help find missing persons." So, from 2011 until 2015, Maureen and Don had no idea what had happened to their son, and Daniel's remains were found near the town of Temiskaming Shores last spring. For years, Maureen and her husband obviously were left wondering, and I'm sure in a permanent state of pain, and I can't imagine, as a parent, how difficult those years were. But Maureen said back in 2013, "This is not a traditional death. We can't have a funeral or a memorial because what if Daniel shows up? Nobody could have described this to me. You have to live it, breathe it to understand. It's in your skin. You're frozen in time." So there is precedent, though. There is precedent for this House. In British Columbia, Alberta, Manitoba, Nova Scotia, Newfoundland and Saskatchewan, legislation on missing persons has been introduced, legislation that helps to provide families like Maureen's with some degree of comfort. Other provinces have moved forward on this issue. They have passed missing persons legislation. It is time that we do the same. There are 20 active missing persons cases in Waterloo Region at this moment. There are almost 400 across the province of Ontario. The families of these Ontarians are still wondering and looking for assistance. They are not looking for closure. They are looking for justice. This is an issue that affects every community across this province. There are those who go out into the wilderness like Daniel Trask, but there are also those suffering from mental health illness, and particularly elderly persons living with dementia and Alzheimer's. 200,000 people in the province of Ontario currently have some form of dementia. The Alzheimer's Society says that over half of those people at some point will go missing. There is no foul play suspected in these cases, and so this limits the options of families to search for their loved ones. But vulnerable Ontarians need protection, and this legislation would allow families and the respective police agencies, Mr. Speaker, the tools to investigate. Maureen has said that these families deserve answers. We should help them to find these answers. We should pass an Ontario Missing Persons Act. There are concerns on the other side of this equation around privacy. However, in conversations with the Civil Liberties Associations and John Howard Societies across the country, some provinces have done a better job, to be honest, than others to address these issues. We should learn from their experience, Mr. Speaker, and we're in a unique position to benefit from what other provinces have made mistakes. We can build and craft a piece of legislation which is stronger and which learns from those experiences. The formulation of this legislation to allow police to investigate missing persons while keeping in mind the protections to individual privacy in keeping with the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms is possible. But there are no more excuses to not move forward. The Attorney General for BC recently, last year, stated publicly, she said, "This legislation acknowledges that access to relevant records can sometimes mean the difference between life and death. With knowledge, though, comes the responsibility to act." There are many voices of support for this legislation, and they first came forward in support of the petition that was introduced in this House, which I sponsored and was motivated to do so by Maureen and Don. These voices, these associations, are the Canadian Mental Health Association, Community Justice Initiatives, the Waterloo Region Crime Prevention Council, Friends of Temagami. Police Chiefs of Ontario have endorsed in principle the concept of having additional tools to look for missing persons. The province of Ontario, with all party support, can and should strike the critical balance between disclosing and protecting information with the safety and welfare of vulnerable people at its paramount goal. We can also ensure that Daniel Trask and the journey that his parents and other families have been on have not been in vain, Mr. Speaker. We can prevent future pain and suffering when a family member goes missing by introducing and crafting a Made in Ontario Missing Persons Act, which reflects what needs to happen in this province. It should be our privilege and responsibility to do so. We need more than sympathy, we need more than empathy, we need more than indifference. We are in a unique position in this House as individual legislators to take action and to motivate action in this regard. And so it is my pleasure to bring this motion to the floor. I hope that the government and the Attorney General and the Minister are listening intently. There are no more excuses not to take action on this issue. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.